Welcome to week 2 of our Strength for Service series. Jesus said that he came not to be served, but to serve. So I assume as Christians, we are trying to adopt that attitude as well. Last week, I highlighted Paul's attitude of pouring himself out in service and presented some scriptures that challenge the philosophies behind the mantra, "You can't pour from an empty cup." However, this isn't to say that we as humans don't require some type of renewal. Our need for rest is not only obvious based on our lived experience, but also literally encoded into God's design of the universe, since he spent 6 days creating and then rested on the 7th day. In fact, when Exodus 31 reiterates the Sabbath command originally found in Exodus 20, the author writes about our Creator, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed. The Hebrew word for refreshed literally means to take a breath, or figuratively pausing to catch one's breath. It's totally incompatible with a non-stop, frenetic pace of life. Fast forward to Jesus' time on earth, and he not only kept the weekly Sabbath, but he also required additional periods of rest and solitude to fuel him for continued ministry. Together, these make a compelling case for the classical prescription of rest and relaxation to prevent burnout. What has your idea of R&R looked like in the past? Have you ever returned from a beach vacation feeling like you needed another one? Ended a Netflix binge feeling lethargic and unmotivated? Slept in super late, yet woke up wanting to go right back to bed? Also, yes. The problem is that these sources of renewal that we often reach for under the umbrella of self-care usually only address our physical and mental health. God created us with physical needs and spiritual needs. When I use the term spirit today, I'm talking about that inward part of us that physical solutions cannot address. In the self-care examples I mentioned a moment ago, the beach, Netflix, and extra sleep, we saw things that rested our bodies and brains, but none of them addressed the inner person. The big idea I want to convey today is that true renewal isn't merely found through rest for the body and relief from mental stress, but through relationship with God. If we desire sustained strength for service, then we need to be adequately supporting our physical needs and our spiritual lives. We already know what to do when our bodies feel run down. Prioritize sleep, eat better, incorporate more movement, etc. We are also usually fairly aware of how to address mental fatigue. We might seek out a counselor to help us cope with stress, outsource the preparation of this year's tax returns, or take a week of PTO to get our brain off of spreadsheets and emails. However, as a body of believers, do we know what to do when our spirit is weary? Consider 2 Corinthians 4, verse 16, our feature scripture this week. Paul writes, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day." Paul acknowledges that our outward person requires care and eventually declines in spite of our best efforts. But he also speaks of an inward person that requires daily renewal. Unlike our physical bodies, the inward person can continue to be renewed throughout our lives. No self-care trend can fix the spiritual. Attunement with God is the only path to this type of renewal. Jesus came in the flesh, so his needs while on earth are the same as ours are now. When he needed rest, he didn't book a vacation, binge the next season of The Chosen, or spend a day at the spa. These modern forms of self-care, while not inherently wrong, that's the operative word, can become bottomless pits of hedonism if we don't keep them in balance. What I like about these kinds of self-care is that they do refresh our bodies and minds, and caring for the physical absolutely is necessary. However, they don't satisfy on a spiritual level, so by themselves, they can't leave us feeling completely renewed. If we read the gospel accounts with an eye towards how Jesus renewed himself, we'll notice that when he withdrew from his normal activities, it was primarily to spend time with his Father in prayer and worship. That is the missing ingredient in the secret sauce of true renewal, and no amount of shiny nail polish or pina coladas by the poolside will substitute. Please don't think I'm trying to demonize every act of non-religious relaxation. There are degrees of value in modern self-care. My goal is to shed light on the relatively fleeting nature of these kinds of pleasures compared to the lasting value of time spent investing in God's ways. Self-care that addresses only physical needs has a relatively short shelf life. Contrast the temporary nature of the pleasure found in, say, getting a massage, to what King David said about God in Psalm 16, verse 11, when he wrote, "At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." Not fleeting pleasures, lasting pleasures, because God's presence provides true renewal of the whole person. Looking at the situation objectively, of course, that's the kind of renewal that we want to experience, the kind that lasts, the kind that reaches parts of us that other forms of self-care can't. But let's face it, this requires a lot of purposefulness. It is so much easier in the moment to doom scroll than to pray and study. But I think this is just one of those areas where we're going to get out of it what we put in. So we need to have the self-discipline to play the long game and not just take the path of least resistance. And oh, how tempting that path is when we are just bone tired. I do get it. Let's discuss a few types of R&R that actually renew our inner selves, not just our bodies. I believe the number one way to become renewed and strengthened for service is to take our weekly Sabbaths more seriously. And I can't stress enough how important it is that we approach our use of those 24 hours per week with reverence and intention. If we're taking a weekly break from what the Old Testament calls customary work, then rest for the mind and body is naturally built in. God intended the Sabbath to likewise renew our inner selves, but this requires some action on our part in the form of prayer, Bible study, meditation, and worship. The team here at Stir has so much more to say about keeping the Sabbath with our whole hearts in future devotionals. So for now, I'll just encourage us to evaluate whether our Sabbaths have been leaving us feeling refreshed. And if the answer is no, to pray for help discerning what needs to change. Other means of spiritual renewal besides Sabbath keeping, obviously we need to spend time with our Father in prayer and Bible study throughout the week. And I also strongly encourage us to find a type of worship music that makes us feel genuinely full of praise and make it a regular part of our weeks. I used to only listen to Christian music on the Sabbath when I really felt like secular music wasn't appropriate, but the rest of the week I would listen to secular music. Once I started weaving Christian music into the fabric of my day-to-day life, the other 6 days, it really helped keep my heart consistently oriented towards God. Personally, I like to look up chords to worship songs and spend time at the piano singing and playing. It checks all the boxes to renew my whole self on a deep level. We can also feel spiritually renewed from such experiences as Christian marriage retreats, Christian leadership weekends, a week spent at church camp, time spent in fellowship with our Bible study group or godly friends, quiet times spent in nature with plenty of opportunity for connection with God. It's critical that we understand that the missing component from most modern self-care can only be found when we dwell in the presence of the one from whom times of refreshing come, the one who can renew that inward person day by day. If hearing all this makes spiritual renewal sound like one more thing to add to your to-do list, remember Psalm 23. David pictures God as the shepherd who provides for everything his sheep need: rest, food, water, safety, and ultimately, he restores the whole person. The more we learn to seek God first, the more we'll find that many of our needs are already being met in his presence, reducing our need to pursue other forms of self-care elsewhere. The point I want us to take from this week's study is this: true renewal isn't merely found in ceasing activity, it's found in meeting with God. Being aware of the limits of self-care and the limitlessness of God helps prevent us from jumping on a hamster wheel of self-care pursuits and then wondering why we still feel burnt out. Next week, we'll dig even deeper into the practical problems with finding strength for continued service by troubleshooting the most common obstacles: perfectionism, disordered priorities, and an absence of well thought out boundaries. See you then.